You finally shut off your morning alarm after you snoozed it much longer than you promised yourself you would the night before. You grudgingly throw off the covers and rush to the coffee maker to guzzle down your morning dose of caffeine. This story probably sounds all too familiar. Many people, myself included, rely on caffeine to get through the day. Because of this, it is important to understand what it is and how it works, especially since caffeine is something that is consumed so frequently. Although just consuming caffeine never really told me much about what it actually is and does. After researching caffeine specifically and also applying my background in the sciences to that information, I feel as though I have gained the knowledge to share those things with you today. First, I will explain what exactly caffeine is, then I will explain how it works within the body, and lastly, I will share with you how it can affect our sleep. First, let me share with you some background information about caffeine. The chemical formula for caffeine is CaH10N4O2. This means that a single molecule of caffeine contains 8 carbon atoms, 10 hydrogen atoms, 4 nitrogen atoms, and 2 oxygen atoms. Here is the molecular shape. As you can see, the shape of this molecule is quite complicated. The shape is not very important right now, but will be important to keep in mind when we discuss how caffeine works in the body. All we need to understand for now is that the elements that combine to form caffeine form this very shape for every single molecule. This molecule can come from many different sources. There are 2 main categories from which caffeine is sourced. There's natural caffeine and synthetic caffeine. According to a 2015 National Center for Biotechnology article written by Cappelletti, Darla, Sani, and Aromatario, caffeine is the most widely used psychostimulant in the world. Some sources of caffeine come from coffee, others tea, cocoa, mate, and colina. This means that any food processed with these ingredients also contains caffeine. The same caffeine that occurs naturally can also be made synthetically in the lab. This is done by combining different substances and forcing them to go through multiple reactions with the end product being caffeine. Synthetic caffeine is yet another source of caffeine. Now that we have a good amount of background information regarding caffeine, let's discuss how it functions in the body. It is first important to note that caffeine is a stimulant. This means that brain activity is increased, which is why we seek caffeine when we are tired. Cappelletti, Darla, Sani, and Aromatario state that after caffeine is ingested, the caffeine blocks adenosine receptors. Adenosine is a naturally occurring substance in the body that, when bound to receptors in the brain, makes us feel drowsy. Before going into more detail, let's define what a receptor is and compare the shapes of a caffeine and adenosine molecule. Receptors are located within cells. Each receptor has a shape-specific signal that it may receive. Once a signal is received, a response is given by the receptor, as you can see in the image here. Without stimulating a receptor, certain mechanisms will not occur. Let's take another look at a molecule of caffeine and compare it to a molecule of adenosine. As you can see, these areas here and here are very similar. The similarity of these shapes is what allows caffeine to bind to adenosine receptors. According to the article by Cappelletti, Darla, Sani, and Aromatario, when adenosine is bound to these receptors, our brain processes slow down. Since caffeine is close enough to the shape of adenosine, as you can see here, it can fit into its receptors, blocking the actual adenosine from binding. Although the caffeine is bound to the receptor, it does not produce the same effect. Since the adenosine is unable to bind to the receptor because the caffeine molecule is in its place, it is no longer able to slow down our brain processes. It is this mechanism of blocking adenosine from binding to receptors in our brain that provides the well-known effects of caffeine. Now that we have discussed how ingesting caffeine speeds up our system, let's find out what happens when it is time to go to bed. Since caffeine's mechanisms are designed to wake you up, when taken near bedtime, it can have adverse effects on sleep. According to a 2013 article in the Journal of Sleep Medicine, a study done by Christopher Drake, Timothy Rowers, John Shambroom, and Thomas Roth finds that when caffeine was taken 6 hours before bedtime, the study found that sleep was reduced by more than 1 hour. It was suggested in the article that for quality rest, to refrain from caffeine consumption at least 6 hours before rest. Although caffeine can be useful to stay awake during the day, it is also important to understand how it could affect your quality of sleep. Today, I have informed you on what caffeine is, how it works, and how it affects our rest at night. All of these things are important to keep in mind in today's society in which caffeine is so widely used. Now, the next time you roll out of bed to immediately toss back a cup of coffee, you know exactly what it is you are consuming and the effects that it will have on you.